Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cyber Sensei again, the definitive podcast for cybersecurity educators, brought to you by Cyberbit. To those who are listening to the podcast for the first time, welcome. For everyone else in our growing community, welcome back. My name is Sharon. I'm the CMO at Cyberbit, joined here by Mr. Adam Breaker. Hello, Adam.
Hi,
And
Sean.
our very special guest speaker, Mike Hamilton, founder and CISO at Critical Insight. Hi, Mike.
Hi.
I will introduce you more formally in just a moment. First of all, the usual formalities and reminders. This session is live. We will be opening up for questions after about 30 minutes. So all you need to do is raise your hand after we conclude our chat if you want to speak, and we will unmute you and allow you to ask the questions live. If you prefer to send questions by text, you can send them in the Q&A section of the Zoom chat, and we will make sure we answer them in the Q&A session. Whatever we cannot because of the time, we'll make sure to get back to you after the session. This session is being recorded. It will be available to you on all the leading podcast platforms and on our YouTube channel. And the updates will also be on Cyberbit's LinkedIn profile, and all of you will also be getting an email with the links to the relevant recordings, so you will have it readily available. So great to have you here. Adam, if you'd like to present our topic and our guest.
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, it was a pleasure of mine. I was doing an assessment of cybersecurity platforms for a client, and I came to know Mike and his company, Critical Insight. And I was very impressed with the direct way that he approaches it, the pragmatic way he approaches cybersecurity. And I could tell there was something special about the way he helps develop talent. And so we developed a little bit of a relationship, and I started asking him about his background, and I understood the nonprofit that he started up and his Pisces work. And so Mike will talk about that. But it's a real pleasure for me to get to steal this time with Mike and to always learn from him and to have him share that with our audience today. So, Mike, if you would give the audience a bit of your background and how you developed your skills in your profession and your role as an educator.
Yeah, well, so I think actually, so I'm not an educator, but I have helped to set up an educational platform. And I think that my personal background and how I landed here it does have something to do with the way I view this, because, when I went to school, there was no such thing as a degree in cyber, right? You had to do things that walked right up to the line of doing something illegal and then sometimes doing something illegal. And so, valuing that curiosity and the willingness to take risk and home experimentation all kind of came out of that background. My education is in earth science. And so I have 3 degrees in geology, chemistry, and oceanography, which does nothing for cybersecurity. My transition into that field, I'll tell you about some other day. I can tell you about it now because the statute of limitations has expired. But I started contracting and consulting, started hand rolling firewalls back in the early 90s and selling those in Los Angeles. Ended up contracting, consulting. I was eventually hired by a startup called Guardant, which was one of the first managed security service providers. Guardant was acquired by VeriSign, and VeriSign made me the managing consultant for VeriSign Global Security. So in that role, I went to work on an airplane, lived in hotels, ate in restaurants, and drove rental cars. And then my daughter was born. And Dad cannot go to work on an airplane anymore. So I took the role as the CISO of the city of Seattle and did that for about 8 years. And that's kind of where I formed hey, we really need to monitor these local governments because they're not doing that themselves. And so got some grant funding, put together a regional monitoring project, and eventually bolted that project onto colleges and universities. And that's what became the Pisces Project. And so that's kind of an abbreviated version of how I got here and how education ended up being a major focus of mine.
Very cool. Thanks. In our last episode, we had an awesome opportunity to visit with Nick Muma, who's the former MX cybersecurity manager, and he talked about how he's developing talent and leveraging platforms. And our podcast here is sponsored by Cyberbit, which works with higher education institutions, academies and stuff like that to build hands-on programs, cyber ranges, et cetera. But you've built a hands-on approach as well. And it's interesting. The first question I thought I might ask you is, as an industry veteran who's both built a company and then been on the receiving side of cybersecurity services, what did you see most needs to be changed for the education, the 2-year, 4-year colleges? What do they most need to change to develop the kind of talent you would hire?
So, I think adaptation of programs kind of underway. I think we've not fumbled, but we're feeling our way through what it takes to create these practitioners and have them qualified when they roll off the assembly line. And in my view, we need to teach to focus on specific roles and not the totality of cyber. Everybody needs some kind of affinity over all of the moving parts, the regulatory aspects, et cetera. But there are roles that we sorely need that we are not making in enough volume. And I think we really need to focus on those roles. Those roles are also perfect entry-level roles. And when you are going to develop a career in security, you get your foot in the door, and that's when you really start to build a career and start to learn. Right? It's really the hands-on experience. And so I think a refocusing to A, teach to these specific roles, but B, really focus on entry level. Don't have this fantasy that you're going to be a policy advisor when you get your undergraduate degree.
So you're focused on certifying, developing security analysts, entry-level security analysts,
Yes.
right? You've said, not vulnerability analysis, not GRC, not network engineering. And so if I come back to what you were talking about, if you were 2-year, 4-year school, you would evolve your curricula to be more focused on those entry-level talents, hands-on skills. And what are your thoughts about them aligning that to the NICE framework and others to say these are skills, abilities, knowledge, the competencies that are defined there for that entry-level role?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I think. Pick one role off the NICE framework and get real good at punching out that role, rather than trying to teach all of those to every student. So they come out of that, with barely an education in anything and not really able to specialize in something. What entry-level role are they going to be really qualified to do? Let me just take a second here and explain how PISES works, because I mentioned that. So PISES, the Public Infrastructure Security Cyber Education System. What we do is, as an affiliated nonprofit of the company, Critical Insight, we do the same thing the company does, which cybersecurity monitoring for customer networks. PISES does that for free with a copy of the CI stack for small local governments. And the reason we do it for free is because we collect metadata and IDS alerts from their networks and use that as live fire curriculum for currently 14 colleges and universities across the country. So students, yes, they're getting their book learned and their test taken, but they are sitting their butts down as operational analysts in front of live fire in critical infrastructure, and hopefully in their own neighborhoods, in their own states. That's the way we're trying to put this together. And in that way, they come out with an education, they have operational experience, and maybe they got some kind of certification along the way. And we just came up with a certification that we were going to apply to PISES students. And I think that really is the foundation of why they're coming off the assembly line and getting snapped up so quickly by all of these corporations, is because we've focused on this one role and made them good at that.
So you mentioned certification. So is PISES coming up with their own unique certification, or are you leveraging CompTIA?
No. So PISES is funded by the Department of Homeland Security for deployment, and then we shift that funding over to state governments for sustainment. PISES just came up with a certification. We are partnered with Pacific Northwest National Lab. They did the heavy lifting to come up with a certification, and now we're applying that to the PISES students who qualify for that. And that's largely up to the instructor to go through a little decision matrix and decide whether or not they get the certification or not. So I do think certifications are important. I think some are worth more than others. Your certified ethical hacker certification is not worth much, in my view. And in fact, I gave back my CISSP after 20 years because the only reason I needed it is because it gets you through the automated portion of resume scanning to make sure your resume gets off to somebody who can actually set up an interview, right? That string has to be on there. So certifications are good, realize what they're good for.
What are some of the entry-level certifications you do have moderate to high regard for?
Security Plus is okay. Network Plus is really good. Why? Because the foundation of being able to be an analyst means you know how to look at network traffic and interpret that, right? I talk to student classes all the time, and I tell them, you need to be prepared for this class. And if I walk in here and say port 53 UDP, you better say DNS to me, or we're not having the same conversation. So it's that network, underpinnings background. And again, this is an entry-level role. This forms the basis for going wherever you want to go in this field. So, Network Plus, Security Plus, there are others. If you get one of the expensive ones and you go to SANS and get a GIAC, obviously those are pretty good, but they're super expensive. So, frankly, I think what means more to me is the effort that somebody went through to get that certification. That tells me they're serious. The certification itself doesn't mean a whole lot. The effort that went into it does.
Well, it's interesting with the younger kids today. You mentioned 53, but maybe something like 3074 for Xbox or 3724 for World of Warcraft. Maybe they know those better. I don't know if those are still the ones they use. Somebody out there is probably going to bust me on it.
That's a good point.
But so with Pisces, you mentioned getting the hands-on experience, but you also, as I recall, have a coaching mentoring relationship with that. Can you explain? The students getting these logs, they're doing some threat hunting, but they're getting some coaching and mentoring from
yes.
And then, as I recall, that ratio of the mentor to students. Can you educate us on that?
So we call that mentor an oversight analyst. And what that really is a security analyst that was pulled from our commercial operation that has the experience of working in a real SOC and working with tiers of analysts and things like that. And what this person does is review all of the tickets entered by students. And in the first part of a quarter, there's a lot of work saying, no, you've reversed source and destination ports. Port 80 will never be a source port, et cetera, et cetera. And by the end of the quarter, they were clicking on all cylinders. And, part of getting to be a lot better at this and being able to report always the right information that's needed to hand off to another tier of analyst, all that gets worked out. And so the oversight analyst, I think, is an important part of this that also allows us to get to know the students. And, Critical Insight, part of the reason we are affiliated with Pisces, the nonprofit, is because this is our employee pipeline. It's not just for us. We've been discovered by Boeing and Microsoft and Amazon and, General Dynamics. I mean, there's a lot of corporations that are hiring these students because they are coming out with this trio of education, certification, and experience. So the oversight analyst there really gets them up to speed, and frankly helps the instructors who are spread a little thinly and aren't really, the best analysts themselves, at least in the beginning. So, providing that oversight, that extra mentorship, I think has really helped the students a lot. And we can see that from the difference in what student tickets are like in the beginning of a quarter versus what they are in the end of a quarter.
Now, by the way, it's interesting because, we've been working a lot with universities on running in a bit of a different way, running labs and cyber range exercises within part of the program. And one of the questions, and you're talking about certifying or qualifying analysts, or preparing them for work, which is the first, like the entry level role. So you're putting them basically in a entry level live position. What do they need? And a lot of the questions that we're getting before those live fire experiences, what do they need to know? Like, what's the minimum they need to know in order to start, being in the SOC role? So they probably need some entry level skills. Is it basic IT, basic networking? So what is the fundamental ground that they need in order to put them in the SOC seat as a tier one analyst?
It's a great question. And this is one reason I say that we value home experimentation. One of the interview questions we have here is, tell me about your home network. right? Tell me what you put together, because I think that's one of the kind of fundamental things you need to know is, how does a network work? How do we put this together? What's an IP address? What's a net mask? What's a route? Why do you have to point at a DNS server? All that's very important. And then the details of networking are important, especially for the commonly used protocols, right? DNS, Universal Datagram Protocol, and how that's different from, TCP, and frankly, some of the other networking protocols that you'll probably never see, SNA, DECnet. But it's also kind of having an understanding of what bad people do, how malware works, things like that, right? When, if you've detonated malware and seen what kinds of changes it's made on a computer, and then how it communicates over a network for its command and control. And you say, this is the signal right here of how our preventive controls have failed, right? The antivirus didn't catch this thing, the endpoint security didn't catch it, but yet here it's talking to Uzbekistan, right? So that mission focus is part of it as well. And I don't want to understate that, because I think that's really important, right? Yep. What we're doing and why, right? Which is one reason we put local government data in front of our students, because you get it. They all get it. This is your flushing toilet. This is your drinking water. This is making sure the fire department gets to your house before it burns down. All the things that local elections, 911, that's all very critical stuff. And so the students get dialed into this because they understand the importance of what they're doing. So it's not only the background and the underpinnings, it's how you motivate them while they're in class as well.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Motivating them in class, you see that because they're seeing the hands-on experience, they're seeing the value of their own skill set and crawling through these logs and looking, or essentially threat hunting. Is that right? Well, it's threat hunting. Part of it's threat hunting. And so I'll just describe this. So we put a device on a customer network, right? We call them a community data sharing partner, and it's got an IDS in there, Suricata. And as you all know, 99% of what an IDS says is nothing. Right? But it's blowing off all the time. Look at me, look at me, look. So the students will go through these IDS alerts and they'll pick one. They'll say, this one looks interesting. This might be the real deal. They will look at the provenance of IP addresses and domain names. They will take the net flow records, the metadata that we pulled off the network, what happened 5 minutes before and 5 minutes after. So that's basically ticket processing and being part of a SOC operation, right? The other part of that is hunting. So we get indicators, really simple indicators, right? Don't talk to this IP address. Every week from the network of national fusion centers. They come from other places too, but this is a particularly good one. And so here are a whole bunch of IP addresses and domain names that we identified this week as hassling local governments. And so the students will go through and then we'll find out, has anyone in any of our customer base talked to any of these before we knew they were bad? So that's how we do the hunting. So these are very, very primitive ways, when you compare this to a real SOC operation, this is a happy meal. But still, the mission focus, the live fire, the oversight so that you have an actual analyst working with you, that all really improves the educational experience. And like I say, these students are getting snapped up like crazy. Do you see the need for other hands-on experiences and live fire exercises and competitions and stuff that community colleges and four-year schools could do more of? More live fire, yes, absolutely. Even if you monitor your own perimeter, right? I mean, just the background noise of the internet is astonishing. And when you put that in front of someone, it's like, whoa, I had no idea that was going on, and that motivates them. For competitions, though, let me just take a second here and talk about this. So when everybody gets into cyber, they want to be a red teamer, they want to be a pen tester, they want to be a break-in artist, all right? If you're Corporation X, how frequently do you need to hire someone to do a penetration test on your network? It is once per year, all right? So if I had a drain clog once per year, would I keep a janitor on staff or a plumber on staff? No, absolutely not. So let's realize what we're doing here. When you're getting everybody into being a penetration tester, right, and encouraging this, I want to be a red teamer, and we make this huge population of red teamers, and there's not enough jobs for them, guess what they end up doing, right? It's too easy right now. People are being bribed to go to the dark side. So let's take a step back,
And let's say, what
That's
kind of people
amazing.
are we punching off the assembly line here? Are they really the ones we need? So I'm not a big fan of these competitions, I got to tell you.
But you know what? That's when you say the default competition is a hacking competition. It's a capture the flag.
That's true. That's right.
That's
CTF,
exactly.
that's
and,
right.
And interestingly, I mean, we're running now what we call the International Cyber League actually for universities, and one of the aspects that we were trying actually to use in that competition is to actually make it a blue team competition. So basically, what we're doing there is simulating the attacks in a cyber range, inviting, and we've got 90 institutions, probably a lot of the attendees on this podcast as well are there. And that's something that they've never done. So what we say, this is not a capture the flag. The capture the flag does not teach you about the real world, because you're not going to be breaking into anything. And I think, to your point, why is it so common? Because maybe it's easier to implement. Maybe it's easier to teach students, just put them in front of a server and let them break into the server, because you need the server and maybe a firewall, and there you go. But how do you teach a student to defend? You need an adversary. You need something to simulate it. Maybe you need to put them, as you do, in a SOC. So the difficulty of teaching blue team skills, defensive skills, maybe is influencing kind of some of the programs to, let's just continue to do ethical hacking and pen testing and so on, and which is okay, but to a certain level. But you're right, it's been basically taking over the.
And I completely agree with you, Sharon. It is necessary. Like I said, one of the things that students need to know: what do bad guys do? What are the tactics they use?
The attacker side, the attacker perspective. But
and how do I detect? Right, like the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Right, that's what that whole thing is about. Right. So I mean, they're not useless, but let's just quit making so many penetration testers that we flood the market with bad guys.
Agreed by 100%.
Well, Mike, let me ask you a question to deal with my psychosis here. I have like these two devils sitting on both shoulders, and I'm not sure which one's right. And when I was building a cybersecurity curriculum, I'm like, as a CISO and a CIO in my own right, I'm like, here's all the things I wished I'd known going to school. And then I'm like, by the time my curriculum's done, they're going to be in school for 9 years. But on the operational side, I keep going, it's just not always, of course, but it's the basics that often get us into trouble. We're not doing asset management. We're not looking at our attack surface. We're not implementing MFA. We're not doing configuration management. We're not vulnerability scanning. We're not patching, all these basics. And I'm like, well, I wanted to teach the importance of that in a program. And I'm like, but a lot of times coming out of school, they're going to have nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the basics still are what we often get hacked with? But at the other hand, most of the entry-level jobs, that's not what they're going to be working on. Some other department has that.
True. And let's just have eyes wide open about what it's like to get that stuff done in an environment, right? Security is a cost center. It doesn't make any money for a corporation, right? It's just something that needs to be paid for. And increasingly, it's regulatory pressure and stuff you got to do. So, at some point, the boot is going to be on the neck enough to where like vulnerability management does get done properly. And that's going to be aided by the software bill of materials and the IoT seal of approval that came out of the National Cyber Strategy, things like that. Where was I going with that?
Some of the basics, the students that I would want to teach them about asset configuration, vulnerability scanning, stuff like that. I go quite often, they need to know it as an area of their background, but they're not going to do that job when they come out of school.
They're not. And the difficulty of getting it done inside an organization is there are all these competing pressures to not do it, right? Operations runs everything. And if you say, I'm sorry, you need to start taking systems out of service so that we can turn off deprecated SSL ciphers, that's not going anywhere. So when we get around to it, we'll do it. So I don't think enough of the teaching students exactly how this works in practice, right? The theory of manage your vulnerabilities, right? Identify the assets on your network, right? As conceptually, those are very straightforward. Operationally, those become very difficult to do because the continuity of network operations trumps everything, right? It's more about availability than security when you're talking about computing systems that facilitate ongoing business. So yeah, I mean, you can teach somebody to be a good vulnerability manager and use a scanner and identify vulnerabilities and convert those to risk, because here's the likelihood this will be exploited. Here's the impact this will be exploited. And then you prepare your disposition, say, we think we should mitigate this with controls by pulling the system out and having it patched. And you go to governance, then they go, no, we're going to accept that risk until such time as we can comfortably do that. And that's the way the conversation goes a lot. So it's the reality of doing this versus the kind of rose-colored glasses where it's like, well, if we just did all this stuff, we'd be secure. Well, it's not that easy to get it all done.
Yeah,
I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of where I wanted to go with that.
So if I understand it correctly, the schools you're working with, there's a broad-based background of these roles that they're exposed to, but the focus is on networking and the core fundamentals. But then at the end, you really prepare them to be a security analyst, a SOC analyst. But what do you see as the differences between the 2-year programs and the 4-year programs that do that? Or what would you like to see as the difference?
What I would like to see is, so this role that we focus on, analyst, is the 10th fastest growing job in the country, and it's the only cyber job on the top 10 list. And I would like to see more of a focus on developing that role. Since that's what we need most of, let's develop that role, make it an entry-level role, help the employers design job descriptions that better address the fact that it's an entry-level role. And as we do, facilitate all of the incoming analysts to pick a career direction they like and help them do that. And so for CI, for the commercial company, we hire out of Pisces. More than 50% of our SOC operation comes from Pisces. When they come in as an entry-level analyst, we can, as soon as they meet their first gates, right? They have 6 weeks to make their gates. If they make it in 1 week, doesn't matter. They get promoted. And you can go up the level of analyst all the way to SOC supervisor. In fact, our chief delivery officer started as an analyst, right? We also create pathways to go into consulting. And so we've had a couple of our analysts that are now red teamers. They're penetration testers. Some of them are now operations engineers. Some of them now do business analytics. Some of them do hardware engineering to send out to the customers to put on the network. So providing all of these pathways, but noting that this is an entry-level position. I want you to come in and look at network stuff and find the stuff that's bad so that we can put out little fires before they get big. And by the way, you just landed in cyber, and there's a lot of ways you can go. Which one appeals to you? So I think not only developing this entry-level role better, but working with corporations so that they can advertise the job properly. Nobody's going to come in with 5 years experience and 3 degrees. All right. It's not happening, unless you want.
Do you still see organizations believe that they need to look for experience, like 5 years of experience? Because,
yeah,
there's nowhere to be found. I mean, it's very
I know. This is why they say we can't hire anybody. Well, your job description is lame.
But Mike, you came into this career with 3 degrees.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That's not probably not, the
I'm not the best example.
Okay.
Yeah. But
same here.
Did you say, if you were to compare, by the way, and that's an interesting stat that we're running with the organizations that are running like our cyber range programs, if you're to compare regular graduates versus ones that actually did Pisces or did live fire exercises, what would be the difference between, first of all, their operational state, so when they're ready to go, so they don't need to do any onboarding, when have they completed their onboarding and they're operational, like in the time difference, and promotion, so from tier 1 to tier 2, do you see a difference between the speed of getting promoted to their first position and their onboarding period?
Yeah, well, so we are almost 100% Pisces hiring now. And so it's a little bit hard to delineate what a non-Pisces student would look like in terms of time to promotion, things like that. I do know that all of our Pisces students have been promoted very quickly and chosen pathways for them. And maybe their pathway is, I'm just going to stay an analyst, because in today's world, an analyst is a remote job. And so all the universities that I speak with, they say to a person, our intent is to hire and to have, or is to graduate these students and have them hired into the local community and participate in the local economy. Well, this is the kind of job you can do that with now. And so, all over the country, there are these schools teaching Pisces, and they're on our stack. And I think that's a big differentiator why they can come in and they can get promoted quickly and get up to speed quickly, because they've already seen what they're going to see. It's just more sophisticated. They have access to other things like endpoint events and a packet capture to review and cloud events and all these things. So there's still a period of getting them up to speed, but having been educated on our stack really helps that along. And I want to answer one thing Adam asked too. What about community colleges? What would I like to see differently?
Right.
Okay, so a 4-year degree is a great thing. And I'm sure that philosophy class has done something for you. In my view, because we need so many of these analysts, right? If we were neck deep in these people such that they were going for $50,000 a year, we would hire our way out of this problem. All right. Technology is not going to do it by itself. Technology is there to facilitate better action by humans. We need a lot of these humans, and we are working on a 2-year program for community colleges to treat this a lot more like trade school, because really that's what it is. We want you to learn this one thing. You can have, exposure to all of these other things. What does an auditor do, for example? Okay, well, that's really good context to have. It's not going to help you in an analyst job, and it's not going to help you get your foot in the door for an analyst job. So a 2-year community college program that was very focused on this particular role and getting these folks in as entry-level analysts, that's where I think we need to go.
Interesting, Mike, here in a couple of podcasts, we're going to be interviewing Dr. Mark Sorrells from Fayetteville Tech Community College, who's built one of the larger community college cyber programs, and that they're laser focused on developing hireable talent. As we come to a close here, Mike, a couple of questions. You mentioned that philosophy class. I am hopeful that the students will learn
Don't just to anybody
virtue.
It's a philosophy major.
Yeah.
I just hope that they will learn Aristotelian virtue ethics and deal with the vagueness of Kant and those kind of things, because we want men and women of character. But anyway, I'll leave that.
That was almost Marcus Aurelius Stoicism.
Oh, guy, I actually keep his little book. Don't get me started. I keep it next to my desk. Open up his little quotes, and then I'm embarrassed with how few of them I actually follow. But that's another story. But we've seen some of these programs, and we're also going to be interviewing Pete Herzog, who was the founder of ISACOM and the open source testing methodology and stuff like that. And they have some really wonderful exercises to challenge people's thinking around cybersecurity. But when you get a student that's come to you, or some young person who's finished a boot camp or a school that come to you, are there a particular set of 2 or 3 wicked questions you ask them to challenge their curiosity, their critical thinking, just how they approach the problem?
I wouldn't say critical questions that I want them to formulate an answer for right away, but we are very interested in how curious you are. And to me, that is manifest in what kind of diddling around on the internet you have done with a home network you have put together, right? If I say IDS and you say, yeah, I got an IDS running on my home network, and I went down to Goodwill and I bought a $5 access point, and I flashed it with the DDWRT firmware, turned it into a firewall. It's like, you have my attention, right? You have my attention. If they say, I've done perimeter scanning for all of the major financial institutions, that's actually you haven't done anything illegal, right? That's the background noise of the internet. Some people will volunteer something, especially when they talk to me, and I'll be forthcoming and I'll say, I'm the guy that gave Kevin Mitnick an account on a Vax at USC that he used to get in a lot of trouble, and the FBI crawled up my backside. Once you break the ice like that, people will start talking about little things they've done, and it will become apparent whether or not they have the kind of curiosity and the willingness to take a little bit of risk to see how things really work. And that tells me they've done a lot of independent study, and that's worth something. That is worth something. I passed all the tests is worth less.
All I can say is I've been in jail on 4 continents, and that usually gets the conversation started.
Okay.
But, Mike, our audience here, instructors, professors helping to develop the next generation of cyber talent. What's the one question I should have asked you I wasn't smart enough to ask that you would want them to know? Trying to take a key takeaway they can put into their program, something you just want to make sure they know as somebody who hires and develops talent yourself. And
I would say, this thing about mission focus, why we're doing this. If the reason you're giving students for doing this is that there's a lot of jobs in this field, okay, that can be a motivator. All right. But when you bring in geopolitical context, the criticality of the things that provide our quality of life as Americans and how fragile they are, and how these are the things that we need to focus on, right? We can't have 911 kicked over. We can't have hospitals being crushed, right? I think that is more of a motivator than you're going to make money doing this someday, right? And pulling them into that mindset, I think, is very important.
People lose their what when they forget their why.
Yep.
And they get burned out if they don't know how to balance their hobbies with their professional life, with their personal life.
Yep.
Burnout's a real serious issue in this industry. And I'd be curious, we've got a little bit of time. Is there anything that you notice that you do just based on the way you lead at Critical Insight to help keep your staff and yourself, Mike, from getting burned out? Because you're never done in this field. There's always, it's like being a farmer. There's always something more to do.
Yeah. I mean, this is partially just an artifact of the way the world has changed. But we know that these folks work really hard, and it's very difficult to have a job description which in part says you're always going to lose. And right now, the United States is losing a lot. So so it's remote work. And we have design controls that go into remote workspaces so that our auditors say, okay, all that's okay. We can demonstrate our security controls. I just went through our latest audit so that we got our security papers to show. But I think importantly, our analysts work 3 on, 4 off. So it's live where you want. You want to hunt, fish, live in rural Montana? We don't care. You need a network connection and a space to work in. And the ability to work 3 days, 12-hour shifts. Our folks love this. They just love this. And we've looked at our competitors, right? How do you take care of your analysts? And they go, well, we take an Indy race car driving. Okay, knock yourself out. We're going to provide them a quality of life where they decide they want to live and make sure that they have that work-life balance. You're going to have more time off than you spend in days in the workspace here. And by the way, what you're doing is super important. That's reinforced all the time. And that's why we have a 95% retention rate through the Great Resignation and all the other things that have happened.
So first of all, I want to remind the audience. So I'm starting to get some questions here from text, but which I'll ask you in a moment. So I want to remind the audience again to ask you questions both as an educator. You kind of wear both hats, as an educator, as an employer, as a cybersecurity expert. So you have the employer's perspective, but also the educator's perspective. So definitely feel free to type in or raise your hand for questions from both sides. And I think now from the employer's perspective, I want to ask you, as an employer of cybersecurity professionals, when you look at a CV, what are the top 3 bullet points that you want to see as an employer to increase the chances of hiring an employee? Because what we're feeling that there's a gap between what is being written and the expectations. So what are the 3 bullets you'd love to see in a graduate CV, completing university or college, that would say, hey, I really want to look at this person and get them employed?
Yeah. So, the triad is education, certification, experience. And, just a toe in the water for that certification, as long as you've, you've gone through some effort to get some kind of certification there. What we want to see, though, is proficiency in networking and Linux, right? You need to know
That's great.
Unix-based operating systems. You need to know shell scripting. It's nice if you know a scripting language like Python or something like that. But this is where you're going to be diving in, and the rubber's going to hit the road is when we put a Linux system in front of you. All of our analysts have to go through virtual desktops in order to get to customer data, so that we have strict access control, not only over the endpoint security on their managed device, but at the network level, because they have to be coming from one of these virtual systems. Well, that's going to be a Linux system. And if,
Agreed.
Your first day on the job is the first time you've ever seen a bash shell, it's going to be tougher.
And
So
it's a very technical, very specific technical, but very focused. So I think that's important for the audience here. Is there anything that's maybe not as technical, something else that you want to see that will help?
Well, it's always good to know that they are good communicators. Because there's a lot in even the analyst business where you have to communicate to the incoming shift and leave them with enough information to pick up a case that you've been working on. There are folks that I've said that have gone other directions in the company, and some of those are customer communications and customer success. And if they are predisposed to being good communicators, providing that pathway as well. So we like to find, the ones that either from the way the resume is written or how they can articulate on the resume that they have, participated in writing exercises that would be relevant to communicating cybersecurity issues, right? Which is a little bit of an art form, frankly, right?
It's tough, especially when when we work with industry. One of the challenges is to communicate as a team, but also to communicate to the non-technical team, to management, to the CFO. I've got a ransomware attack. Simulations help a lot there. So that's something it's very hard to learn without actually running those live fire simulations.
Yep.
It makes perfect sense. Adam, anything else before I mention a few of the questions that I'm getting?
Yeah, let's go to the questions because we value much time.
All right. So one question that I have is, would you recommend live fire exercises to entry-level programs? If so, what are the topics? So I guess the question is, live fire is something kind of advanced. We're talking about it, but on the other hand, when you're entry level, what can you actually run? So what would you answer that?
Well, I mean, when you're entry level, you can look at lots of stuff. Nobody's going to give you really, put you in charge of anything. Live fire, when I say live fire, I mean network data, in real time.
Yep.
I don't know of anything that I would describe as live fire for, GRC consulting, for example, or something like that. Right. So it's really, and here's my context for this. So I was the CISO for the city of Seattle, and, that was an under-resourced position. And so I needed solutions. And so, hey, I need interns out of the local universities. And so when the interns would come in, and the first thing I would put them on, I'd say, okay, I want you to go look at all the login failures on the perimeter, and I want you to chart for me which countries they came from. And every one of them, despite having gone through a 4-year education in cybersecurity at a major university, would come up to me white and say, we are being attacked by the Chinese. Look at this. I said, yeah, I know. Is this the first time you've ever seen this? Right. That's the context they don't have coming out of school. Right. You think this is a nice controlled thing. This is not a nice controlled thing. We are flying by the seat of our pants, and we're holding on with everything we got.
So that leads me to another question that I have here, which I'm going to skip one question because it relates exactly to what you said, is what are the tools we can use to teach more hands-on blue skills? So we talked about obviously having too much pen testing. So what are the tools that are available at our disposal to teach the defensive skills?
So the kind of basic tool that you need is an intrusion detection system. And the original open source one is called Snort. And Snort was bought by Cisco. And so Cisco makes this is a signature-based detection technology. Suricata is a better one than Snort at this point. It's got a lot more features. And so just setting up a system on a network with an IDS that'll start throwing out alerts and have the students look at alerts and evaluate these alerts. That's super simple. Get involved in your own school's network security program and ask them for data. To the extent that it's not going to, be an unauthorized privacy disclosure or something like that, right? There's lots of data that they can give you. There is a tool called Security Onion that is also open source and has a whole bunch of tools right there. And a lot of those are for monitoring and investigation. If you really wanted to aggregate events to let students mine them, and you were, for example, pulling network flows out of a network, right, which is stripping the packet headers off so that you have source address, destination address, port, protocol flags, timestamp, all that junk, but no content. You can't read email, can't see web page, no financial transactions, nothing like that. If you can aggregate network flows in an ELK stack, ELK, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, all of a sudden, and this is the basis of how we do it. We aggregate all of these things in an ELK stack and then provide students highly regulated access to the stack and the ticketing system that they'll need to pick out an alert and go, I'm turning this into a ticket. We got to look at this. So, on the low end, just throw down an IDS system and let it start chirping at you and let the students look at it. If you want to build something out, a good thing to do is leverage your own school's network because there's lots of stuff going on in there. And my suspicion is you don't have enough analysts working for the school SOC.
Not that many higher education institutions have a SOC. I mean, we're seeing, we've just launched with one of our customers a pretty advanced SOC. We're starting to see this; it's actually been growing, but that's new. But start your own SOC is kind of the basic thing. Use your own network, use your own data. Why not? Yeah, exactly.
Especially if you monitor the guest network from the dorms.
Oh no!
Did that one time. That was scary.
And that's another thing. Listen, all you schools, I'm going to tell you two things. Number one, segregate your student traffic, okay, on a network that's all their own, so it doesn't get mixed up with everything else. And number two, for the most part, you guys don't use DMARC records in your DNS, okay? You need to use DMARC, DKIM, SPF records to keep people from spoofing your email addresses and stealing your money. And universities, colleges are particularly bad at this.
By the way, one thing that we're seeing, so you kind of a great answer to the tools is, first of all, get your own stack of open source tools, open source IDSs, some data, and start playing with that. That's easy. It's free, and start playing around with that and build courses on top of that. What we do often with our customers is basically after they've done that, we work with them in actually implementing the commercial tools. So you can actually have courses. So for example, what we have in our Cyber Range platform, we've actually included tools like CrowdStrike, Splunk, Carbon Black. Splunk is key. I mean, if you want to go one level further into a commercial SIEM, probably Splunk. And I would say if you write Splunk incident response or Splunk monitoring in your CV, probably a big advantage when you get hired. Yep. So that's definitely the next step. It's not essential, but it's something that's a huge advantage when you get hired. So definitely recommend that. I have one more question here, and I'm not sure if we have any other ones. You've mentioned government and enterprise, working with government and enterprise. From your perspective, do government and enterprise analysts have the same level of experience and skill requirements, or are these two different types of profiles?
Okay, so that's a really great question. So in government is frozen out of this market, right? This is a seller's market, right? Cyber people know they can change jobs every 6 months and double their salary, and that's what they do. And so it's very, very difficult, despite the criticality of government, it's very hard to get people to work in government. So they have lower requirements. They have a different value proposition. When you go to work in government, you can work for 20 years, get a pension for the rest of your life, and then go do another career, right? Plus you get like Groundhog Day off and lots of days off. When you're in enterprise, and I will partially retract what I said about penetration testers, because in an enterprise, there are lots of roles for, yes, analysts and things like that. But a well-formed and mature system development lifecycle is going to include security testing in different phases along the way. That's essentially a penetration tester trying to penetrate our own product, right? So there is a lot of that. Now, your question, are the qualifications different? Yes, the qualifications are lower in local government because the expectation there is you're going to be there for a long time. We're going to bring you along. And this is an entry-level job. In enterprises, I think the expectation more is you do have that 5 years of experience. You have gone through the entry-level experience, and now we're going to put you in a role that wasn't the original one you started, but that you have now become qualified to do. So, and also an enterprise is not an enterprise, is not an enterprise, right? Morgan Stanley is right. And we're talking about big corporations and things like, the Boeings of the world. I would also say that when you get into DoD and classified space, then you have to be very experienced. Then you really need your chops at that point, and you need to have gone through the clearance ringer.
Got it. Perfect. Those are the questions that I currently have. Did you guys get any other questions? Shachar, Adam, anything else or anything that you wanted to ask? Adam?
Mike, is there a instructor or professor or two that you think we should interview to provide some nuggets to this audience?
There was a guy that was on here. He's one of the Pisces instructors, Stu Steiner. And because he's listened to me drone on so many times, he took off. But he's from Eastern Washington University, and he is fantastic at this. And I know that folks from Eastern Washington University have gone to work for General Dynamics and I believe GE and other places like that, plus some that we have hired from that university as well. So Stu, who's part of your network here, I think would be a good one to hire. To interview. And if you wanted some others, they're starting to litter the landscape. I'm actually going out April 19, 20, and 21 to keynote a conference in Kentucky, because Kentucky is one of the expansion states for Pisces. And I'm seriously looking forward to this. But Kentucky seems to be all in. So I will say this too: there are when a university comes on to teach the Pisces curriculum, we provide the curriculum. It's not something that anybody needs to develop. And so all of the schools are teaching exactly the same thing. And then we all meet once a year. And if anybody's got good ideas on how we can improve the curriculum, we will fold that back in, and it goes all out to everybody. So we're all on the same page. The trick is getting two things. Number one, buy-in from local governments. So one of our schools is Alabama A&M. It's one of the HBCUs. So I've gone out to Alabama, and I have tried to talk local governments into letting us monitor them for the purpose of providing live fire to their students, so we can increase the bench strength in their state and have people hired as analysts, because you need these people. And I am a carpetbagger from Seattle, and no one would talk to me. So that turns out to be the more difficult thing. The schools are going to go, you're providing curriculum and access to data, and we're in. Getting local governments in your own state to participate here requires some influence. And the conversation at the state level, where we're going to roll this out with federal money after we get 6 schools and 20 local governments all putting students out and getting them graduated and hired, the state needs to take over operations and maintenance funding, or we got to be done. So those are the harder things to get done when we roll out into a state.
One of my colleagues has done a threat vector analysis, done an attack surface analysis in a normative way of every county in America. And surprisingly, to me, my ignorance, Kentucky scored really, really well.
Is that right?
Yeah, but
they are highly motivated here. I'll tell you, and nice people too. I'm enjoying this, working with them.
Well, I'm taking another cybersecurity class. One of the guys in there is a state and local government from Kentucky. So he was not surprised. He was pretty proud of his state. Anyway, Mike, thank you so much for your time today. I know you've got a hard stop here in a few minutes. Thanks for your counsel, your time. Really appreciate your counsel.
Yeah, that was awesome. Also, thank you very much from me. I want to thank you, Adam, as well. I want to thank the audience. And again, to let you know that you can find Cyber Sensei on Spotify, on Apple, Google Podcasts, on our YouTube channel, on the CyberBit website. You will hear from us shortly about the next Cyber Sensei episode. It's going to be very interesting. So keep on the watch for that email. And of course, we will all receive an email with a recording, so you can see this later on if you want to repeat or listen to any of this content. It was absolutely amazing. I suggest you to follow Cyberbit on LinkedIn to get updates and to hear about the next podcasts that are coming. Mike, it's been awesome. It's been a pleasure. I learned a lot. It was very educating for me. Adam, thank you very much for hosting, and hoping to see all of you in our upcoming episodes. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the opportunity, because this has been a great chat. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Bye, everybody.